Yo, what's going on, Headliner Nation? It's the Doc, and if you're wondering why I'm already sweating, it's because this video is about to bring the heat. And there's also a heat wave going through the Midwest right now, so my office is about 115 degrees. But I digress. This video is all about bringing you the dark horse candidates to finish #1 overall at their position this year in fantasy football. I'm going through each position and what it takes to be the #1 overall guy in fantasy at that position. And then I'm going to give you my pick for the best dark horse candidate to surprise everyone and finish at the top of their position group. Let's go. All right, first up, let's talk about the quarterback position. So for each position group, I went back and looked at the last decade of performances, but specifically the last 3 years to look at what type of numbers do they have to get to actually finish at the top of their position. And for the quarterbacks, we're looking at about 622 pass attempts, 4,700 yards passing, 38 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, 95 rushing attempts, 514 rushing yards, and 6 rushing touchdowns. Again, just looking at the averages over the last 3 years from the quarterback one. Now, some things you need to know about quarterback ones specifically: no rookie has finished as the QB1 in the last decade. So just, I don't care how much you love these rookies, just throw them out for this ranking. They can't be a dark horse to finish as the #1 overall guy. Team attempts per game have to be at about 35 passes a game. That puts them in the top third of the league in terms of pass attempts per game. We need quarterbacks that are throwing the ball a ton to finish as the quarterback one. That just makes sense. From a rushing perspective, they got to give you something. The quarterback one was top 11 in quarterback rush attempts each of the last 3 years. So if you're looking for a quarterback, you need to have somebody that's going to give you a little bit of juice in the run game to actually take them over the top. And if you get somebody that runs a lot, that gives you even more of an advantage. Now, the quarterback has to have a history of throwing touchdowns at a high clip. Over the last 3 years, they're averaging about 3 touchdowns to every interception that they throw. You can't have somebody that's not scoring a bunch of touchdowns, and you can't have somebody that's throwing a ton of interceptions. They just tend to have that 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. Now let's get into my dark horse pick for this position, and we're going way outside the top 10 for this. A lot of guys in that like 10 to 12, 10 to 15 range that could potentially have it, but just don't fit all the criteria just right. But I found one that I really love, and that is Geno Smith. Now, before you get on me, I know that last year could have been a mirage for Geno Smith. It may not have been, it could have been his best year that he's ever had. It may not be what he is going forward, but what if it isn't? What if Geno Smith has figured it out and is now one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the NFL? Last year, 572 attempts, 4,200 yards, 30 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. That's that 3-to-1 ratio we're looking for. 68 rush attempts for 366 yards and 1 touchdown. Very, very similar rushing numbers to what Pat Mahomes had as the QB1 last year. Now, the other thing I like about Geno Smith, he's going as the quarterback 15, despite leading the league in completion percentage and being inside the top 10 in passing yards and touchdowns last year. This guy is being seriously underrated despite what he did just last season. There's also a little bit of room for improvement. The team was 27th in red zone efficiency last year. If he scores a few more touchdowns, maybe he gets it up to 40, 41 touchdowns. We're talking about a guy that could potentially sneak in as the QB1 overall. The other thing I like is that the team really invested in the offense during the draft this year. Added JSN to this pass game should open up more opportunities for Geno Smith to run out of 11 personnel with 1 running back, 1 tight end. I like that because that was a package that Geno Smith actually excelled in last season. 4th most efficient quarterback on 11 personnel dropbacks last year in the league, despite being in the bottom third of the league in team usage of that personnel. So if they use more 11 personnel, and I know JSN's hurt right now, but he's expected to come back quickly. If they're using him in 11 personnel, we could see more red zone opportunities, a little bit more efficiency in the red zone, and we know that Geno can excel in that package already. The other thing I love about Geno, it's his 2nd year as the starter, and it's the 2nd year working under offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, who led the Rams to one of the best passing offenses in the league. There's a lot to love about Geno Smith. He's one of the only guys that, if you really look at these numbers of what it takes to be a QB1, that has this type of upside that you can get way after the rest of these guys. So go get you some Geno Smith in drafts this year. Next up, we got the running back position, the absolute backbone of most fantasy championships. And the RB1 tends to be on about 50% of the teams that win fantasy championships. So you have to have the RB1. Let me give you a guy that I think could finish as the RB1 that's way outside of the top 10. Now, when we're looking at the last 3 years, what it takes to be the RB1 in fantasy, we're looking at about 374 fantasy points. Rush attempts about 241, 1,200 yards rushing, 16 touchdowns though. The RB1 over the last 3 years has scored a ton of touchdowns on the ground. It's very important that we get a touchdown score. As for targets, we know that running backs that catch passes score a lot of fantasy points, and so we're looking for 95 targets. That's a huge number. Not a lot of guys in the league can hit that. 77 receptions, 613 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns through the air. That is what we're kind of looking for in an RB1 overall. Now, some important notes. Only 3 rookie running backs have had over 374 PPR points in a season all time. Eric Dickerson, Saquon Barkley in 2018, and Edgerrin James. Nobody else has come within 35 points. So rookie running backs have some history, but it's going to take an absolutely monumental effort to be the RB1. History is just not on their side. The last 5 RB1s each scored over 20 PPR points per game, so we know how important it is to catch a bunch of passes. Only 2 of the last 10 RB1s have been over the age of 25. So guys over the age of 25, really low chance that they're going to end up as the RB1. No RB1 in the last decade has participated in a committee. We're looking for guys that are going to get the bulk 65-70% of their team's touches out of the backfield. And each of the last 2 seasons, the RB1 has played 17 games. I know we can't predict how many games guys will play, but we know that guys that have gotten hurt in the past are more likely to get hurt in the future. So we're keeping that in mind when we're looking for the RB1 candidate. Now, this guy is not a perfect fit, but he is the best fit that I could find, and that is Rhamondre Stevenson. Now, last year, 210 rushing attempts, just over 1,000 yards rushing. Not a great season, but he had 5 touchdowns. But his receiving numbers are what really gives me hope that he could be this dark horse candidate. 88 targets, 69 receptions, 421 yards, and a touchdown in 2022. Very heavily used in the passing game, and we know you got to have some targets if you're going to be the RB1. He was the RB7 as the starter from weeks 5 to 16, so he is a top 12 running back already. He was the 3rd most targeted running back in the league last year. Again, we're looking for those targets. Not a lot of guys are going to have the target volume to be the RB1. Rhamondre Stevenson fits that bill. He also finished as an RB1 44% of the time last year. So in 44% of his games, he finished as a top 12 running back. That's something that you got to have. You have to have that consistency. That was 6th best at the position last season. The only knock that I have for Rhamondre Stevenson is he was very inefficient last year inside the red zone. Only 3 touchdowns despite having 19 runs inside the 10-yard line, and now he has to deal with Ezekiel Elliott vying for that role. But I do think that Rhamondre Stevenson is the better running back of the 2. If Ezekiel Elliott is washed, Rhamondre Stevenson can show he's been working on that red zone efficiency. All of a sudden, we got everything you need to get a dark horse RB1 overall in your fantasy drafts. And let me tell you, he's going outside the top 10 running backs. So you got to make sure you're getting some Rhamondre Stevenson in fantasy this year. All right, before we get into our last 2 positions, let me tell you about our friends over at Manscaped. Use the code HEADLINERS, get 20% off your first purchase. It's that simple, guys. And Manscaped, when you go to their website, you're going to find products that you didn't even know you needed. Manscaped is helping us elevate our hygiene game over at the Fantasy Headliners. Let me tell you, you don't want to know what Jake and Kyle looked like before Manscaped was one of our sponsors. Head on over to manscaped.com, use the code HEADLINERS, and get 20% off on us. All right, next up, we got the wide receiver position. If we look at the last 3 years at the wide receiver position, we're going to need about 389 fantasy points in a PPR league, about 175 targets, and I know that's a lot of targets, but that's what they're averaging over the last 3 years. 129 receptions, 1,700 yards, and 14 touchdowns, and we also need about a 30% target share on their team. So they got to be the number one target getter on their team, as well as the biggest percentage of the targets for their team as a whole. Now, some important notes that we need to know about the wide receiver ones. No rookie wide receiver has finished as the wide receiver one in the last decade. Targets are absolutely king when it comes to this position. 3 of the last 4 wide receiver ones led the league in targets at the wide receiver position, and every wide receiver one of the past 10 years has finished inside the top 4 in total targets. So you got to have somebody that's healthy and getting a ton of targets each and every week. Now, no wide receiver one in the last decade was second on their team in targets. So we don't need anybody that's not supposed to be the alpha dog for their team. Age matters when it comes to the wide receiver one. 8 of the last 10 wide receiver ones were between the ages of 26 and 28. Only one guy was 29, no 30-year-olds in that group. Justin Jefferson, also the other outlier at 23 last year. Now, each of the last 5 wide receiver ones finished top 4 at the position for touchdowns. So we need somebody that not only is getting a ton of targets, but is also able to turn those targets into touchdowns in the red zone. So let's look at my candidate for the dark horse at the wide receiver one position. And this year, I'm going to go with Garrett Wilson for the New York Jets. Now, he is just outside of the top 10. You're still going to have to pay a pretty premium price for him. But of the guys outside of the top 3 or 4, I think Garrett Wilson has the best chance to really explode and become the wide receiver one. Last year, 147 targets, 83 catches, 1,100 yards, and 4 touchdowns, 25% target share as a rookie, though. So huge numbers when you consider the fact that he was a rookie. He got a massive quarterback upgrade with Aaron Rodgers. I expect him to be much more efficient, even if he has around the same number of targets. But we're hoping for a big jump in those targets as well, because remember, we're looking for about 175 targets from the wide receiver one overall. We hope that Aaron Rodgers, who was also the quarterback for Davante Adams when he was the wide receiver one overall in 2020, really hyperfixates again on his number one guy in Garrett Wilson. Now, during Jets training camp this year, Aaron Rodgers threw to Garrett Wilson 35 times in 11-on-11 drills, 7 times more than the next closest pass catcher, despite Garrett Wilson missing 2 weeks of camp. So we're hoping that that type of volume translates, and he is not only just the best target on the team, but he's getting a considerable number of targets over the next closest guy. The other thing we know is that with anyone but Zach Wilson last year at quarterback, Garrett Wilson averaged 17 fantasy points a game, 11 targets, and 6 catches. We're hoping that the 11 targets turns into like maybe 12 or 13, and that the catches get a huge bump with a much more efficient quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. The last thing we know is that he's due for some positive touchdown regression. He was one of only 3 wide receivers with over 1,000 yards receiving last year with less than 5 touchdowns. So if he can jump the touchdown total up to, let's say we only get to 9 or 10, that would still put him in the range of wide receiver 1 overall for fantasy, and you're currently drafting him as the wide receiver 10. Go get you some Garrett Wilson this year. All right, last up, we got the tight end position, and over the last 3 years, we're looking at basically Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. We're looking for fantasy points over 300, about 310 to be precise, 150 targets, 107 receptions. That's incredibly difficult for a tight end to reach. We're also looking for 1,372 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns, and more specifically, a 24.7 to 25% target share in their offense. Now, some important notes about the tight end position. Only 2 rookie tight ends have ever finished with more than 200 PPR points in the history of the NFL. I'm not going to put a rookie tight end in this spot because I'm sorry, they just don't score enough points historically. They're not even within 100 points. Unless we get one of the greatest rookie tight end seasons, actually the greatest rookie tight end season of all time, they're not going to finish as the tight end 1 overall. Each of the last 3 tight end 1s were on teams that were in the top 7 in target percentage to the tight end position. They threw the tight end a lot. So we're looking for offenses that like to use the tight end position, obviously. Since 2013, the tight end with the most targets has finished as the tight end 1 7 times. So really, we're just looking for the tight end that's going to get the most volume of all the tight ends. And since 2016, that's been Travis Kelce. He has been the tight end 1 every single year since 2016, except for 2021, where he finished as the tight end 2. So let's be honest, anybody on this list not named Travis Kelce, anybody I mention, don't hit me up in the comments and tell me that Travis Kelce is, of course, going to be the tight end 1. That's not the point of the exercise, but just know these numbers are very, very challenging to find a player that even comes close to fitting the category. So the guy I picked doesn't necessarily fit all the categories, but I'm going to tell you why I like him as a dark horse candidate. Even if he doesn't finish as the tight end 1 overall, he could finish within the top 5, and if some things break right, could find himself as the number 1 tight end in the league. And for me, that guy is Cole Kmet. Now, before everyone bashes me, I get it. The Bears are not a great passing offense, but there's some potential there. He had 69 targets, 50 receptions, 544 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Also had a 19% target share in their offense last year. So he was used often. In fact, he was used so often that he led the Bears in targets, catches, receiving yards, and touchdown catches last season. One of only 3 tight ends to lead their team in all of those categories. You might know the other 2, Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce. He was also the tight end 5 in total points from week 6 on. So outside of a really rough first 5 weeks, Cole Kmet was very consistent as your tight end in your starting slot for fantasy football. Now, if Justin Fields can take a huge leap as a passer and Cole Kmet remains healthy and remains his binky all year, and that DJ Moore is not the go-to target in this offense now that he's the new wide receiver 1, and probably 3 or 4 tight ends get hurt and don't play the whole year, I could see an opportunity for Cole Kmet to be the best tight end in fantasy football in 2023. And I know it's a long shot, but just give me this one. All right. Just give me a chance with this one. All right. That's it for this video, guys. Let me know in the comments, who is your favorite dark horse candidate that I talked about, or if you've got somebody else that you want to talk about, let me know in the comments down below. Congratulations. If your name's up on the screen, email Jake at info@thefantasyheadliners.com. You won a free draft guide for commenting on my video last week. And of course, if you guys haven't already, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. And if you feel so inclined, hit that little join button and become a member of Headliner Nation. Headliner Nation is the best place to talk about fantasy football on the internet. We got all sorts of great things happening, member exclusive giveaways during the season. You don't want to miss out on that. Make sure you're hitting that join button so you can get access to all this amazing stuff that we're giving away from Pristine Auction. And you also get a ton of access to Jake, Kyle, me, Taylor, Big Mac, to help your fantasy teams win this year. We got a great community going over on Discord. Make sure you're hitting the join button. But that's all I got for you guys. I'm going to go find myself a cold beverage. The Doc is out.